Thank you very much, Asti. A very warm welcome to everybody here. Once again, an excellent turnout for a BritJam webinar. I believe 25 since April the 7th now, and we continue to engage our members through these webinars. And also something that's become a feature is the ability for us to reach out to UK-facing businesses and also our colleagues in the ASEAN region as well. So a very warm welcome to you. I'm particularly pleased to also welcome our partner and sponsor of this particular webinar, which is Kelly's Express, well known and well renowned throughout Indonesia for logistics, whether it's from a corporate perspective or a personal and domestic perspective. Thank you very much, Kelly's Express. It's a great pleasure to welcome the panel that we have today, and it's also a little bit strange at times for a Chamber of Commerce. We spend most of our time talking up the opportunities in Indonesia. For years now, we've been going on roadshows into the UK, going from town to town, city to city, dispelling some of the myths, trying to get people to think of Indonesia in a much greater context than just Bali, which is what it is for some. And really doing some of the PR for the country, which I think we would all accept from time to time. Indonesia is not great at presenting the best of what it is, particularly in terms of business opportunities. So when we look at the particular piece of work that's behind today's webinar, which comes from TMF and will be delivered by Alvin Christian, who's the Managing Director of the TMF Group Indonesia, we begin by looking at a perspective which shows Indonesia as being the most complicated market for doing business out of 72 that were polled. But together with the other panelists, Marius, who was mentioned to you, Foreign Council, who have represented a number of businesses that have been doing market access into Indonesia in the fields of engineering, manufacturing, infrastructure, to name but a few. And also Gabriel, who's the country director of Arab, a company committed to being involved in many of the progressive opportunities in Indonesia around infrastructure, energy, and others. We'll be talking to two people that'll be able to put some balance and some perspective on Indonesia, because yes, it might be a little bit complicated, as we're going to find out, but at the same time, it is still a country of great opportunity, and it is not deterring the right businesses from taking market access opportunities. So I think with that, just to remind everybody, as Asti mentioned, there is a Q&A box, please use it. We have some questions already from you delivered as you made your registration. Thanks. We'll try and get through as many of those as we can. In some cases, they're a little bit similar, so we might have to do some bundling. Hope you don't mind that. And anything that we don't get around to, we will provide an opportunity to give some answers by email and continue the dialogue that way, should you wish. So from me, really, I'd like to hand over the baton to hear the findings of the work that is at the center of this particular webinar. And in doing so, welcome Alvin Christian, who is the Managing Director of TMF Group Indonesia. Alvin.
Thanks very much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this discussion this afternoon with all of you. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe and sound. Also, thanks for Gabriel and Maris to join us today, and hope to have a fruitful discussion among ourselves and along with the audience, obviously. So to open up, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today about our global complexity, business complexity index. What I'm hoping to be able to deliver is sort of the overall process taken to conduct the GBCI and the consideration taken into place and sort of the results that came out of it. But before we do that, to set the context for our discussion, thought it'd be helpful for me to give a brief overview of who we are, TMF Group, and what we do. So TMF Group, simply put, as a tagline is showing there, we make a complex world simple. So we do that by helping our clients expand internationally, and make them feel belong wherever they are in the world. We do this by helping companies properly set up businesses in different countries, expand into and invest into those countries, but at the same time making sure that they're doing it in a safe and compliant manner in accordance with the local and international regulations. So just a few key facts about us, TMF Group. We are a globally operating company. We have a global footprint in 80 plus jurisdictions with about close to 8,000 professionals at the different offices throughout the world. We are globally certified from an ISO and ISAE perspective, as well as business continuity program perspectives. We do have quite a number of global clients, about 15,000 of them. We are servicing majority of the Fortune Global 500 and majority of the FTSE, or the Financial Times 100 index. We are servicing in the realm of corporate secretarial entity management, accounting and tax services, HR and payroll services, as well as capital market. Just a quick view of our global clients we have across the world, maybe a few notable ones: Amazon, Alibaba, Apple, Gojek. Actually, Arab is also a client of us, and from some of the ones that are local organizations are Gojek and Medco Energy are the some of our global client portfolios. So this is actually a study that has been conducted that kicked off about 7 years back. So this is the 7-year TMF Group conducted the study. The study itself is conducted based on 3 essential categories being listed here. One is the rules, regulations, and penalties. 2 is the accounting and tax. And 3 is the HR and payroll, i.e. labor law environment. Hopping over to the results of the 2020 Complexity Index study. This is a snapshot of the most complex jurisdictions dependent upon the different regions we operate in. You can see that Indonesia on the right side there has the unenviable position to be ranked number 1 from the perspective of business complexity in all the jurisdictions that we operate in. So about 77 of them, and followed closely by Brazil. And then Argentina and Bolivia that are on the Americas region of our operations. Conversely, on the other side of it, the 3 most simple jurisdictions are represented here. Americas with Curacao, and USA and Jamaica hold the number 1, 2, and 3 of the simplest jurisdictions to operate in. And while in APAC, Hong Kong has the highest rank of the simplest jurisdiction for APAC, followed by Singapore and New Zealand. To give a better context of the study and the results, thought it'd be helpful to look at a couple of jurisdictions in APAC, in Asia Pacific, to get a better sense of the different nuances of the JBCI. So the first one here we have China. China is the 6th most complex globally, globally, and second most complex jurisdiction in Asia Pacific next to Indonesia. Key challenges resulting in the complexities are the trade war or the trade tensions between US and China, and obviously play a big factor to the ability to get set up and get operating in China. In addition to that is the layers upon layers of legislation and regulations that are quite decentralized. There is the central government mandates being obviously controlled and managed at a central level. And then you have the provincial level regulations as well as interpretations that could vary quite drastically from one to another. On the other side of it, there are a couple of main drivers of the simplicity and what make China attractive for investors. One is the incentives for multinationals companies to enter China and market their products within China jurisdiction. The second point there is the the foreign investment law that just came into place earlier this year in January 2020, which essentially streamline and simplify the process to create joint venture or create a foreign entity within the China jurisdiction. Next example we have here is Malaysia, which is our closest neighbor, maybe next to Singapore. So Malaysia is ranked number 9th most complex globally and 3rd most complex in Asia Pacific next to China. The challenges faced by Malaysia are cumbersome incorporation process with multiple applications and requirements needed, which obviously slow down the process of incorporation. The secondary challenge there is the prescribed form and template being used, whereby the language requirement is in Malay. And then there's a bit about the digital signature, which also is a nuance we're still experiencing in Indonesia, where it's still not widely accepted. On the other side of it, you have some drivers of simplicity in Malaysia, where one, the legal system in Malaysia is based on common law. Number 2, the convergence of accounting practices in Malaysia to the International Financial Reporting Standard, or IFRS, and the appetite or desire by the Malaysian government to simplify the process of incorporation and getting set up, or the directorship requirement to attract more FDI into the Malaysian market. Next is the country that's probably the simplest or second simplest jurisdiction in APAC, which is Singapore. Some of the challenges in Singapore being a hub of a lot of multinational companies are the scrutiny around BEPS, which is the base erosion and profit shifting, and countermeasures by the OECD to minimize the shifting of profit into the country. And then the other one is the quota around foreign workers, which regularly reviewed and adjusted. On the other side of it, where it has a lot of, is the drivers of simplicity. One is the corporate tax rate, which is quite competitive at 17%. And then there is also the tax treaty or double tax agreements signed with over 80 different countries that which make Singapore an attractive place to operate, or designated as a hub. Also working in favor of Singapore is similar to Malaysia, the legal system that's based on common law framework, allowing for transparency and consistency. And then I think one of the most important thing in my mind is the digitalization of the government, which allows employers, particularly, to transact with government agencies online. So employers and companies. So focusing on Indonesia right now, Indonesia, as mentioned before, has the undesirable position to be ranked #1. The area of complexity in Indonesia, the first ones are the multiple layers of legislations, sometimes called as legislations obesity, whereby we have 30,000 plus of regulations and legislations that sometimes are overlapping and contradictory. This is usually happening at the national level, presidential, and then you have the provincial, and you have the ministry. So, that's obviously the obvious challenge with operating in Indonesia. The secondary challenge with operating in Indonesia is the negative investment list, which is consisting of 500 plus business fields, 515 to be exact, which restricts the percentage of foreign ownership within each industry sector. And it is regarded as one of the primary obstacles to operating or expanding into Indonesia. On the other side of it, for Indonesia, we have the strong desire from the government to increase FDI and create Indonesia as an investment haven, investment destination globally. And a lot of efforts have been put in. One that has been in place for a while now is the OSS, the Online Single Submission System, which is intended to speed up or streamline the process of application or incorporation of an entity in Indonesia. There is another effort addressing the negative list of investment. The idea is to convert that from a negative list of investment into positive investment list, which is expected to be implemented in this year, 2020, which obviously will open up more sectors to of the Indonesian economy to FDI. Another effort being ongoing is the omnibus law being considered. The idea is to, again, finalize and implement omnibus law in 2020. The intention of omnibus law is to revamp and streamline the number of regulations in place. Essentially, the regulation about obesity alluded to earlier. From the perspective of accounting and tax, the challenges in Indonesia is punitive tax laws regime with significant fines and penalties, up to 100% in some cases. Rules and standards that are different, set by different authorities can vary significantly in terms of implementation. And then also just the number of reporting requirements needed. A case in point listed here is for financial service companies, whereby they must report business activities in various shapes and forms to the Ministry of Finance, as well as to the Financial Services Authority, or OJK, as well as to the Central Bank of Indonesia. Simplicity drivers for Indonesia from the perspective of accounting tax are the multiple tax incentives in place now, reacting to COVID. Some of the government schemes being earmarked for tax incentives. I think the size, the quantum of it is about 123 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, to go into the different incentives on corporate tax, import tax, and and a lot of other things which we can go over later on. The other driver of simplicity here is actually the alignment of the standard accounting reporting for Indonesia, or PSAK, to IFRS, which converging in a 2-year gap at the most. So in a lot of cases, it's actually 1-year gap. That's the last piece of the complexity in Indonesia is in the area of labor law, or HR and payroll. The challenges here is the stringent manpower law, which heavily favors employees and restricts disciplinary actions against underperforming employees. Another one is severance payment regulations, contains several multipliers, causing companies to view severance as an expensive endeavor. I think take a quick simulation there, and and learn that could get up to 32 months of potentially payout for termination. And then I think one other one here that's important is the fact that all employment matters, including termination, need to be registered to the Industrial Relations Court, or PHI. Drivers of simplicity is obviously the obvious one is the omnibus law being drafted and being considered right now, which covers also the manpower law. The idea here is to ease the current regulations. It is facing some challenges and outcry due to the changes anticipated to articles mentioned here around the severance and severance year payout. Although within the draft also there's a mandatory bonus payout being considered. I think another one that's driver of simplicity is the single national income tax rate that does not vary from city to city or province to province. Quick snapshot of Indonesia when compared to our neighbors against the other Asian nations. Indonesia ranks highest in the initial investment, land, and labor costs, with also highest number of regulated business sectors at 515, as mentioned earlier. While on the other side, from the perspective of incentives being offered in Indonesia, it is in fact quite competitive when compared to our neighbors. You can see there a variety of deduction and super deduction, and the tax holiday and tax exemption that businesses can take advantage of. Just a quick snapshot of where we are right now, given the pandemic situation. GDP growth 2020 in Q1 and Q2 on a year-on-year basis, showing a 2.97 growth in Q1, a 2.97% growth in Q1, and a contraction of 5.32% in Q2. So under the assumption of longer global economic contraction and mobility restriction, the annual GDP growth is estimated to be, well, best case is 0, and worst case could be around -2% in 2020. Another point to highlight here is the investment realization of this year. The targeted investment realization has not been met. In fact, we're showing a decline in the investment realization between Q1 and Q2 to the tune of 8.9% quarter to date. By and large, looking at some of the figures and charts just now, Indonesia has been severely impacted by the pandemic, maybe not worse than some of the other countries globally, but all the major sectors of the economy of Indonesia, from manufacturing, agriculture, mining, construction, and trade, grounded to a halt in Q2, which resulted in the contraction of 5.32% mentioned earlier. The road to recovery for Indonesia is a long one, but some of the milestones here are: one is to, from a pandemic perspective, is to flatten the curve by contact tracing and spending capacity. From a recession perspective, ensuring adequate support for impacted individuals and businesses, and also by accelerating the recovery through the National Economic Recovery Program and finalization of the Omnibus Law. From a debt perspective, what needs to happen is reallocation and elimination of subsidies to help increase investment in infrastructure and human capital, and tax reforms that can stop Indonesia from climbing further along the debt curve. In terms of reaching the goal to be a high-income economy or a high-income nation, the ambitious target of the government to be top 5 global GDP by 2045 of USD 7 trillion has not changed, but obviously further steps need to be taken by the government in light of the COVID pandemic situation. This is just a bit of our perspectives from TMF Group about Indonesia. It's ranked most complex globally due to the different things mentioned earlier. Evolving in compliance requirements that make it more intricate to do business than before, at least for a short period of time. And the need for firms to better understand the rules of engagement with regulators and integrate them into internal policies. What businesses need to do? I think the most important thing we observe is that businesses need to adapt quickly to fast evolving regulations in landscape. As the changes and the transformation shifting are intended to support the businesses, particularly in light of the pandemic. So on this ones, it's just more a global view of what our observation is. From the accounting and tax perspective, we feel there's a shift away from a well-known stringent and granular auditing process. There is a technology adoption for taxation processes that continue to accelerate globally through the different cooperations by the different governments. Rules, regulations, and penalty, relooking of regulations for paper and seal culture, which is one that obviously a challenge at the moment. And then on the human resources and payroll side, leading the way many aspects of payroll and benefits, and having measures in place to support the economy, the recovery, and the workforce. How to mitigate the complexities? At a high level, there are 4 things that we would recommend here. One, particularly in light of the pandemic situation, is very important to manage your liquidity, right? 2 is to have a local trusted partner that can give you guidance, give you insight, has the knowledge and the know-how, and can help you manage to navigate through the complexity. 3 is take full advantage of the available government schemes and supports BKPM, the Investment Coordinating Board of Indonesia, is very focused on debottlenecking the obstacles for investment realizations right now. And then 4 is focus your time and effort in growth activities to tap into the potential of the market. And then this is just a recap of what we covered earlier in terms of our provision of services and solutions we have for our clients. Again, corporate secretarial, HR and payroll, accounting, tax, and capital market and fund services. So with that, I am concluding my presentation. So back to you, Chris.
Alvin, thank you very much indeed. It's a very, very interesting piece of work. Particularly interesting to see some of the comparative information across some of the neighboring countries. And also, I think we welcome you choosing some direct comparisons with China and Malaysia as well. And perhaps we can pick on one or two points that came out of there. So without doubt, using the parameters that were used in this piece of work, this survey, Indonesia has come out as the most complex country of 70-odd countries surveyed. But right the way through that presentation as well, I kept on seeing lots of positivity around the opportunities, around a commitment to simplification, a commitment to and recognition of some of the areas such as the negative list becoming positive list and so on, that have been impediments to Indonesia being as popular as it should be, given the size. I'd like to bring in Marius, if I may, at this stage, before I go formally into some of the Q&A. I mean, Marius, you're a professional advisor through your legal firm, and as such, you are dealing with companies that are taking a close look at market access at Indonesia, and without doubt, your firm must also be guiding them as to how those opportunities and how doing business might compare to other countries that they would be considering. To what extent do the findings of this survey actually resonate with how you are guiding the businesses that are your clients, and also with the conclusions that your clients are making with regards to Indonesia?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you to Bricham for the opportunity to speak today, and also to Pak Alvin for the excellent presentation. And certainly many of the points that Pak Alvin touched on do resonate. And I think it is understood that Indonesia is a complex jurisdiction to do business, and it has a very complex regulatory environment. However, at the same time, it's clear that the government has recognized that is the case. And the government has taken quite a number of steps to try and address this. And also is very clear that Indonesia is actually open for business. And the government at a central level is very interested in welcoming and attracting foreign investors to Indonesia. So I think that's also something that's important to bear in mind. Against our background, we help clients come in and invest in Indonesia for the first time at different levels, or enter into different trading and distribution arrangements, as well as in terms of their existing operations in Indonesia. And from on the ground, I guess, perspective in the trenches, I think a lot has already actually been done to bring a lot of the initial licensing processes for establishing companies and platforms in Indonesia, bringing them online and streamlining a lot of those processes. Although, as we've heard, there's still a lot of licenses to go through, still a lot of entities to talk to. I think the next step is to bring that into the operational sphere as well. And so we also deal with a number of clients that have existing operations, but still continue to address and deal with problems. I think for companies that are coming in for the first time, I think probably the key thing to bear in mind is really that to be very cautious about adopting a strategy used in a home country or in other countries and just trying to enforce that carte blanche in the Indonesia context. And of course, every country has its differences and particularities. And I think it's particularly important in the case of Indonesia to bear those things in mind, to bear those particular constraints and other issues and challenges which we've discussed during this session in mind, and adapt strategies in relation to that, and perhaps take new and innovative approaches which perhaps wouldn't apply in other markets, but can actually apply in Indonesia context. And we do have some examples of companies who have stayed in Indonesia for the long haul and have really been successful. And once you do establish and find a platform and strategy that works for your business, you suddenly unlock the huge potential and opportunity of Indonesia, which everyone is familiar with. So it's not to say that this is it's a big market. It's something that has to be considered, but at the same time, it's particularly important to use resources on the ground, in order to ensure that a strategy can be adapted to the market and some of these challenges can be successfully navigated.
Thank you, Marius. And I think throughout this, what we're going to find is we'll keep coming back to, yes, difficult, yes, complicated, but can be navigated. And some of the solutions to the navigations is about having the right support systems around. And I think we'd all agree that there's a great deal of professional guidance and in-country experience available to businesses that are looking to come into Indonesia. Gabriel, if I could bring you into the conversation here. Alvin did happen to point a finger at you being Arup, being a client of TMF. You've gone through this process of risk managing market access in the not too distant past. Which were the key things that were highlighted that got particular focus and attention? And how comfortable are you with the decision that's been made?
I guess probably the single trickiest area for us has been starting a business, the formalities around starting a business. I mean, there are different indices. So there's the TMF index, which is about business complexity. Other organizations also run indices. The World Economic Forum has its Global Competitiveness Index, which is essentially about productivity. And on that scale, Indonesia is 50th out of 141. So a pretty respectable level in the scores. And then, of course, there's the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. And back in 2014, Indonesia was languishing at number 120 out of 190. And in 3 years to 2017, it climbed up quite dramatically to number 72, 73, which is where it's been stuck since. But the point about that is that improvements have taken place, and with effort they do take place. But also within those indices, they're an aggregate of a number of different scores. And while on the World Bank rating, Indonesia is at number 73, if you look at starting a business, it's 140 out of 190. And that's certainly been our experience here. I mean, globally, we're an employee-owned company. And that means there's a particular level. We try and squeeze the whole world, the 30-something countries that we have offices in, into a single model of trust ownership. So we have a very, very particular demands about the way we're going to do things. When I arrived, I should have started with a disclaimer. I'm not an Indonesia expert. I've been in Indonesia just over 2 years. I've worked in a few other difficult places around the world. A few other places which on the face of it are difficult. And based on that, my observation is that Indonesia isn't particularly difficult. It has its own flavors and own characteristics. But on this business of setting up a business, it really is one. And our company secretary, who I spoke to about setting up the business here, I said, well, I'm sure it's tricky in all sorts of places, And he said, no, this is definitely the most difficult one that we've had. And like I say, when I arrived 2 years ago, my colleagues were saying, okay, we're trying to set up a third entity. We reckon it's going to take about another year. 2 years on, we're still saying we think it's going to take another year. But in the meantime, we're able to proceed with our partner company. It has absolutely not got in the way of the 5-year plan that we created 2 years ago, where we said, you know, we're going to aim to grow at about 30% a year and have 100 plus staff in 5 years' time, and we've got these financial targets. When we reviewed that after the first 2 years, a couple of months ago, we're bang on target. So there's a sort of compliance piece, which is super important, but for most of our people, that sits in the background. You know, we just get on and deliver projects for our clients in the meantime, taking advice on compliance. And I guess one thing to say about compliance is also that rules are one thing, interpretation of rules is another. And, you know, Indonesia seems to me a pretty flexible place to do business. If you don't flout the rules and go charging gung-ho through them, which is a disastrous approach, but if instead you talk to people, you find out how other people have done things, you find out where the flexibility is, then you can do business. And you know, to give an example of that, well, there are some regulations which are mutually incompatible. You can't obey all the rules all the time in some places, especially when the interpretation of the rules is down to officials whose job is not to make sure they're compatible with everybody else. So, you know, immigration laws and taxation laws can be in conflict. And for example, you can bid for a project, a national priority infrastructure project in our case. You can say to the client, which is the public authority, we're going to need your help to get work permits. And they say, yes, we'll make sure that happens. It's a national priority project. When you actually hit the ground and start delivering, of course, it's not so easy for those things to be managed concurrently. And work permits, and it is another particular area that can be tricky. But again, you can progress with caution, taking advice, not flouting things, but seeing what can be done while other things are sorted out. Yeah, you can get on with it. Another area which I'm aware of, but which actually hasn't affected us, is the human resources. And in particular, employment conditions and the difficulty of laying people off. We're very much aware of that. But you know, we're in this for the long term. We're trying to grow a business and retain people. We tend to have very high staff retention in any case. So for our kind of business, that really doesn't worry us. We're, to use the words of one of our former chairmen, we're gardeners, not hunters. And okay, if the omnibus law is successful, that would be great, because that means the rate of growth that we're going to be achieved is probably higher, because the economy as a whole will grow faster. But if it doesn't succeed in the short term, if the change takes longer, you know, so be it. It's not a showstopper.
Thanks, Gabriel. I think this really, you know, Alvin highlighted, what was it, 30,000 plus overlapping regulations, particularly highlighted the challenges in relation to manpower, the costs also. And we've had a couple of questions around the omnibus law. And of course, as we know, the omnibus law is regarded and hoped to be the solution to a lot of the problems around the complexity, to remove, rather, a way of creating an umbrella law that supersedes a lot of the overlapping laws that have gone before. But the omnibus law, its deliberation has been slowed down because of practical considerations of COVID and so on. The question comes from Anthony King, and it really revolves around a fact that those of us that are in country accept. It is unlikely to be accepted 100% the way it is. Most of us consider that it will get accepted, I think, with elements of dilution, which is the usual way, compromise. But will its diluted form, taking into account those areas where we feel there might be dilution, probably around manpower is one, will its diluted form be enough to really address the main purpose of dismantling so much of this inherited complexity? I'd like to begin with Alvin, because you've had a good 10-minute break listening to your two other colleagues here in the panel. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I did notice that question as well from Anthony. Thanks for that question. A really good one, and I think, like you already alluded to, I think this is part of the deliberation process right now that's ongoing, and obviously more than slightly delayed given the pandemic. I think what needs to happen is, I feel from my observation, our observation, that it's going to be an iterative process, right? So there need to be a prioritization, and there need to be a compromise, like you said, Chris. So that's what come into play in the near future about this. I think in terms of prioritization, the obvious ones in my mind are, one is the negative list or the positive list of investment, right? And the other one is obviously the Cipta Kerja, or the job creation, which also touch upon it, the labor law, right? But right now, the way I kind of view them objectively is, particularly maybe if we use one example on the labor law, right? You have sort of the two extreme, the two end of the spectrums, right? One, if you want to view it that way, is the current, right, the current law, and then on one end, and then the proposal being drafted or being deliberated in the omnibus. So, I think the iterative process needs to take place, and until such time, then we are going to continue to face the delays and the doubts and confusion on potential investors are coming in. But that said, the strong desire of government is definitely there, right? It's just more, again, balancing both end of the spectrums, and finding a happy medium for all parties involved. So,
okay, thank you, Marius. You're a legal man. The omnibus law. What's your sense on to what extent it might need to be diluted, and would such dilution still achieve its purpose?
Yes, yeah, very good question, Chris. So, just by way of background, so the omnibus law, this is a very comprehensive bill that covers many different sectors of the economy and many different underlying legal systems and frameworks in the so it's a huge piece of legislation, and it's been in the House of Representatives, the DPR, in Indonesia since about the middle of April. So it's been there for a number of months, and as this type of legislation moves through the House of Representatives, it goes through a number of stages of discussion, and according to our research, it's still in that first stage of discussion. There's been over 20 meetings, though, to discuss aspects of the bill, and there's usually a long list of outstanding issues that need to be resolved. And from what I understand, there's over 3,000 issues, but the good news is over half of those have now been resolved. So although the government had originally anticipated to pass the bill into law by August, and certainly we're now expecting that timeframe certainly to be pushed out, there is progress being made. Now, as has been pointed out by the other panelists, there are some very sensitive aspects of the omnibus bill, the manpower laws, and the negative list, for example, as well. But this bill covers a lot of different elements, and from the capital investment laws to business licensing system, tax issues, and other things. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if some of these aspects can actually be carved out and moved forward, or the sensitive ones perhaps can be parked. There's a lot of things that can be moved forward in the meantime. Perhaps a very particular example, but in the context of some of the provisions in the Omnibus Bill dealing with the mining sector, what has actually happened is that many of those provisions have been put into separate legislation and passed into law in parallel to the Omnibus Bill. And so, there is a lot there, and there's a lot of work being done to try and reduce these complexities and actually address some of these issues. And I think it will certainly be possible to move forward with many of those things. However, there are some very sensitive areas as well, which are covered there, which is going to mean there is going to be some delay. But hopefully, some of the less controversial ones can continue to be progressed and pushed forward as this bill goes through the stages of discussion in the DPR.
Thanks, and I appreciate your giving the background to our audience on the omnibus law. I had wrongly assumed that there'd be an understanding, but appreciating that so many people are actually from the UK or from ASEAN, maybe not familiar. So I do appreciate that, Marius, and your comments. One thing that we're all focused on at the moment globally is the fact that there has been huge dependence, hasn't there, on China in terms of supply chain for businesses. I mean, talk about far too many eggs in one particular basket. I think if there'd been some basic guidance, it would never have happened this way. And a lot of companies strategically now are looking to diversify, manage the risk of dependence on one particular country. I mean, I noticed from your comments, Alvin, China is the second most complex market in APAC anyway, and presumably the reason why most companies are there is because it's such a huge domestic market and they're allowed access to it. You mentioned that China is in the process of a new foreign investment law, which will come in 2020. So I'd like to ask a question of you first, Alvin, and then perhaps Gabriel could come in with a bit of comment as being with an organization that's present in 30 countries. The question is, will whatever China is doing be enough to stem this sense of need to diversify dependence on it? And secondly, will Indonesia's population, which is the driver of interest in China, Indonesia being the fourth most populous country in the world, be sufficient, in spite of some of its complexities, to attract the diversification? That's my question, Alvin, or double-pronged question.
Sure, and thanks, Chris, for that. And I think the second question about the Indonesia's population being the fourth largest population in the world, definitely going to be a big factor there, right? I mean, just looking at our demography of the workforce, right? About 70% of our population is in that productive age group, right? So that's a good close to 200 million or maybe 190 million of people who are productive age and ready to take on some of this. So in terms of the number one question, which was about the change in the investment law, is that right, Chris? And how that? Well, I think for if anything that sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just the question was, will it be enough to keep companies with that dependence in China and not go ahead with diversification strategies?
Well, I think given what I think the idea, because remember the investment law had been in China, the change in investment law, the streamlining and the simplification measures they took that had all been deliberated and considered before COVID, right? So I think in light of what we know now, right, in Indonesia or globally, I think it would definitely help China, but I think it would, in terms of diversification and companies and organizations mitigating their risks and not putting their eggs all in one basket, i.e. China, are going to continue on.
Okay, so what we're saying here is Indonesia really does, now is the time of opportunity,
Absolutely.
and Indonesia really does need to, even on a diluted basis, address this or get this omnibus law through, among other things, also switch to the positive list. I couldn't also help but notice Vietnam is obviously one of the main competitors to Indonesia when it comes to attracting foreign investment into the ASEAN region, and Indonesia has a high minimum wage, 279 versus 183 to pull up
Yes.
your stats. Things like the cost of land 170 versus 90, and the cost of water utility nearly double.
Right.
Gabriel, as somebody running a new business in Indonesia over the last couple of years, as you say, having still building your business up to its third component at the moment, how heavy have these considerations been?
I mean, for us, the comparisons with Vietnam, for example, are not an issue. We're interested in Vietnam in its own right. It's got a substantial population. We're interested in Indonesia in its own right. It's got a very large population and prospects. We have an office in Ho Chi Minh City, which is at the moment about twice the size of our Jakarta office, but that just happens to be where it's developed. We're interested in both places. I mean, sticking with Indonesia for a moment, of course, if you're an investor thinking about creating a center from which you're going to export products to other areas, then it's a very different question, and that kind of competition is important. But on that point, actually, in the World Bank's ease of doing business rankings, Vietnam and Indonesia are more or less a wash, just because of the things that they measure.
Right.
I think one's at 71 and one's at 73. So that's, one of the other fundamentals about Indonesia is its remarkably consistent, steady growth over since almost the Asian financial crisis. If you look at the GDP growth, you'd think the global financial crisis never happened, and that's because of Indonesia's success in insulating itself from external events, which of course it can't do with COVID. But okay, it would have been great if growth had been 2% higher every year, but nonetheless, whatever it was, 5.5–6% steady growth over 20 years, with all forecasts saying that's likely to continue. If anything, we would be mad not to be in this market.
Yeah, thank you. And even with COVID, a predicted flatlining 0% or just -3 or 4%, I think most countries would be absolutely delighted to have the prospect of that. And as we know, Indonesia has, in previous downturns, Indonesia has been a country that has genuinely come out with the V-shaped recovery. And it's
Yes.
by and large being driven by the domestic consumption. We've been running a quick question survey among our audience here today, and the question was, do you agree with Gabriel? Setup and compliance can be difficult, but it hasn't stopped us with our business plan, not including COVID considerations. I'm not surprised by the outcome, but in spite of things being a little bit difficult, some extra pieces of paper, needing to take in extra advice to make sure that one is regulatorily compliant and so on, 89%, an overwhelming number of those businesses that are on this particular webinar that have direct interest in Indonesia, 89% agree. So these are more annoyances rather than things that really disturb the business plan strategically. So great opportunity for Indonesia if it can just simplify things just that little bit more and make it more attractive to the people in places like the UK that are trying to do the risk management. Gabriel, you more or less gave an answer to our colleague Philomena Chen. She works for with DIT within the Northern Powerhouse region. She was asking for a little bit of comparative information on different on attitudes and sense in different markets. Thank you for your question, Philomena. I'd now like to, we've brought up to the panel the principal of our sponsor, Kelly's Express. That's Raja, a very familiar face to many people. Raja has a question that he would like to ask the panel. Raja, please go ahead.
My company has been in business of bringing in expats and sending back expats. Never have I faced so many numbers of people coming in compared to going out. Now, is there something that the panel did not know against the norm? Because the last 3 months, from May, June, July, we have received 400 full containers coming, new people coming into Indonesia, professionals. How come this is possible when, according to Alvin, there are possibilities and greater difficulties, not simple enough to set up business in Indonesia?
Raja, thanks for raising that, and it's great to hear it from somebody that's actually bringing these people in. Kelly's Express, thank you for that. So, a huge number of people coming in and actually very few people going out. Actually, I don't think we're surprised to hear that, except to the extent, because what we've been saying consistently since the start of this webinar is actually the opportunities in Indonesia are huge. And I think when I ask or invite closing comments from each of our panelists, perhaps it can be in this context of the opportunities are too big to ignore, and in the context, the difficulties in the context of the opportunities actually do pale into a secondary sort of consideration. Marius, how about you going first, and I'll allow Alvin to go last.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the comments. I think that's look. I'm not surprised, but the sheer numbers are quite surprising. I know there's a number of multinational companies that have people waiting, certainly to come in, and perhaps part of this is in the words of Winston Churchill, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Perhaps this is the opportunity, but certainly coming back to those opportunities, perhaps there's a whole separate session we could spend on those, from the movement of the capital city, Puis Kalimantan, to 10 new Balis, to the technology and digital space. Indonesia has been a fantastic, vibrant ground for startups and other technology companies that have grown significantly. And ultimately, if we look at the macro picture, big, dynamic, young population. I think, Chris, you said it. If really some of these complexities and issues can be addressed, and also many of them have already been identified, and proper checks and balances and systematic processes put in place to drive some of these reforms through, Indonesia really, can really sort of regain its position as the real land of opportunity. So, I'm, both an optimist but also pragmatic, and I appreciate there are significant challenges, but I am excited about the future ahead and the opportunities. And I think there are great examples of companies that have been able to successfully manage and navigate these issues and establish and really make a big splash in a really big market and be noticed. So I think on that note, thank you.
And Gabriel, before I ask for your closing comment on the opportunity side, I'd just like to remind you, if I may, that there was one index that you didn't refer to among all those indices that you quoted. And of course, it is the BritCham Business Confidence Index, which has been running for 7 years. And we were about to do our 2021. But just to remind everybody that for the last 3 or 4 years, 2 out of 3 businesses that have responded to that, and these have been British European businesses domiciled in Indonesia, 2 out of 3 are either committed to further investment or still considering further investment in Indonesia. So the opportunities must be there. Gabriel.
Yeah, sorry for the omission. My final observations are actually not really compliance or process related. Well, in a sense, they're platitudes because they apply anywhere. But you know, I would say don't wait, get on with things, but take good advice, whether it's from TMF, you know, as we are doing currently in South America, for example, which is a relatively unknown market for us. But both formal advice and talking to others, to your peers, you know, form relationships, find out how other people are doing things. Local presence or local partners, as Alvin said in his own slides, are absolutely essential. Fly in, fly out doesn't get you very far. You know, it can open a door, but if you want things to happen, you need local partners, local presence to support you. Don't underestimate language misunderstandings. You know, if you're in an environment where your language is not the first language, it's so easy to have misunderstandings. And that applies just as much to written understandings. You might think you've set everything out absolutely crystal clear, but it gets interpreted in different ways. So it's all about communication, actually. Okay. The biggest single set of skills that you need is communication skills.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. So again, you're reconfirming the need to surround yourself with a support infrastructure that's got a lot of experience. And when you mentioned talking to others and delving into networks for anecdotal information about, you know, how to do this and how to navigate that, of course, there is no better than a chamber of commerce such as BritCham with such deep and diverse networks. Alvin, a few closing comments from yourself.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Marius and Gabriel, for your comments just now. For me, I think you know, it's just capping what was said earlier during the slide presentation. Is you know, and maybe responding a bit to the question about the inward or the incoming that's still taking place. I think it's you know, I think some of either the challenges with the GDP growth or the contraction we're witnessing and or we observe and all those things, those are all temporary, right? Those are all temporary. So you know, have in mind about, you know, investing and moving into Indonesia, expanding into Indonesia, developing a business. Now is the time. And, you know, I think the four key things, as mentioned earlier, is, you know, again, about managing your liquidity. And as mentioned by Gabriel and Marius, about having a local partner on the ground that can help you navigate and give guidance, you know, really understand the landscape of the rules and regulations, you know, and take full advantage of what's available for you as you are considering the investment in Indonesia. And I think most important of all is to just focus your time, attention, and effort on the things that you do best, right? The products and services that you do, and you know, and work with others who can, you know, who can help you cover some of the other risk areas as you get set up in Indonesia.
Alvin, thank you very much for that. And as I restate, 89% of those people with a vested interest in this country are experiencing, are having a good experience with their relationship and their journey in Indonesia. That's a very, very significant percentage. We're at the end, unfortunately, of this particular hour that we've overrun. We've dealt with some of the questions that I haven't mentioned people by name, but we've covered them. For example, the China issue, the issue about navigating complex regulatory situations. I'd like to apologize to those people whose questions that we couldn't get round to. Tim, we appreciate your question there, from Leonard, from Andrew, from Batara, Dr. Paul Aitken. That was a human resource related question. For those who don't know, BritCham's Human Capital and Education member focus group kicks off next week. You're welcome to join that. and also the climate change group if you wish, provided that you're a member. So thank you very much for your questions. I at this stage like to thank the sponsorship and partnership of Kelly's Express once again, greatly appreciated. Also to say a big thank you to our panelists, Alvin for sharing the piece of work from TMF that's been at the heart of this particular webinar, to Marius, working partner with a legal firm here, and advising companies with their market access issues as well, and Gabriel, who has gone through this, went through many parts of this journey just a couple of years ago, and is already experiencing some of the benefits from the opportunities that are Indonesia. I noticed that 60-something% of the people on this call are in fact non-members of BritCham. We've had a non-charging policy. We're keeping it going for now. You're very welcome to join us. But what we'd really like is your vote of support by turning your interest in our webinars into interest in corporate membership of BritCham. You really will reap the rewards. I'd just like to wish those of you who are UK facing a very good rest of your morning. Those of you who are over here in Southeast Asia and in particular Indonesia, very good afternoon, soon becoming evening. Thank you for joining us. Please keep an eye on our webinar schedule for other webinars that we know are of particular interest to our membership and our stakeholders. Thanks for joining BritCham on this occasion.